This is. Are you hearing this? This is station. No, I don't know which station anymore. It doesn't matter. If you can hear me, if there's anyone out there still listening, you're not alone. I don't know how long it's been. Days? A week? The clocks have stopped. The streetlights never came back on. The government broadcasts faded one by one. And now it's just this, just me, speaking into a transmitter, hoping someone, anyone, is still out there. They said it was temporary. The officials, the scientists, the reporters, they told us to stay calm. A minor disruption, they called it. Power grids adjusting. Then the emergency tones began. The vague reassurances, then silence. I don't know how many of you are still listening. I don't know if anyone is, but if you are, don't stop. Not yet. Because something is happening. I can feel it in the dead air between words, in the way the static shifts, just slightly, like something pressing against the other side of the frequency. Stay with me. I need to tell you what I've heard, what I've seen, and what's been seen in the dark. The darkness is different now. Not just the kind that comes with nightfall, the familiar kind, the kind we're used to. Number, this is something else. It's everywhere. It's absolute. Avoid where light should be. Cities don't sleep anymore. They don't rest. They just sit there, cold and quiet. Streetlights, buildings, homes, everything swallowed whole. There are no glowing windows in the distance, no headlights cutting through the streets, just candlelight, small flickering dots in an ocean of black. People huddle around them, like primitive tribes, whispering into the embers as if fire itself is the only thing keeping them safe. And the silence is worse. Have you ever truly heard nothing? No hum of appliances, no distant buzz of electricity in the walls, no quiet murmur of televisions behind closed doors? Just an emptiness so deep it presses against your ears, making you wonder if the world has simply stopped existing, beyond what little you can see. And in that silence, something feels wrong. People say they hear things, voices just beyond the range of their hearing, footsteps in places where no one should be walking, shapes at the edges of candlelight. Watching, waiting. But waiting for what? If you're listening to this, then you know what I mean. The phones are dead. The internet vanished without a trace. The last news broadcast was garbled, half-spoken, cut off mid-sentence. And after that, static. People used to talk about digital addiction, about how we relied too much on our screens, our networks, our instant access to everything. But now we'd give anything to hear a notification, a missed call, a voicemail, proof that someone, anyone, is still out there. I try the frequencies every night, scanning, searching. Sometimes I hear something, distant, crackling, voices buried under layers of distortion, but they never last, and I don't know if they're real. I spoke to a man last night. He said he was in a city. But when I asked which one, the line went dead. I heard a woman whisper something, but before I could ask her to repeat it, her voice warped, stretching, distorting, until it became nothing but a low, humming tone. And then there are the ones who say nothing at all. Sometimes I think I hear breathing. Not mine, not close, but somewhere deep within the static. If you're still listening, stay tuned, because whatever is happening, it's only just beginning. If you're still listening, then you've noticed it too. The silence isn't normal. It's spreading. At first, it was just the power, lights flickering out, appliances going dead, the hum of modern life fading away. But now, it's more than that. Entire neighborhoods have gone quiet. Not just dark, quiet. No distant arguments through thin apartment walls, no crying babies, no dogs barking. Just an unnatural stillness. as if the world itself is holding its breath. I've been scanning frequencies all night, trying to find someone, anyone, who can confirm what's happening. A man from the west side said his entire building stopped making noise overnight. People he knew, his neighbors, his friends, gone. Their doors still locked from the inside, their belongings untouched, their beds still made. And then he went silent, too. Now it's happening everywhere. A block goes quiet, then another. Entire streets. And those of us left, those of us still listening, we're starting to ask the same question. Is this still just a blackout? Or is something else taking people? I don't have answers. No one does. But I can tell you this. If you hear something outside your door tonight, don't open it. We lost an entire city last night. I don't mean the power. I don't mean communications. I mean the city itself. Sometime after midnight, all contact with it stopped. The last transmission was an automated emergency alert, cutting off mid-sentence. No warning, no explosion, just gone. Government officials made a statement. A temporary outage, they said. A communications failure. But we know better. Because something got through. A weak, flickering transmission buried in static, intercepted on an unused frequency. At first, it sounded like ordinary interference, garbled voices, electronic distortion, but beneath it, if you listen closely enough, there's something else. It doesn't sound human. It doesn't sound like anything I've ever heard before. Someone out there, someone desperate, tried to describe it before their signal failed. They said it wasn't words. Not exactly, just a series of whispers, overlapping, shifting, growing louder, until they drowned everything else out. And then, nothing. Whatever happened to that city, whatever force swallowed it whole, we weren't meant to understand. And if you're listening right now, if you can still hear my voice, pray that whatever it was, it doesn't come for yours next. I should have known something was wrong before it all went dark. Maybe we all should have. It started with the lights. Small, almost unnoticeable flickers. A brief dimming in street lamps, televisions shutting off for seconds at a time, alarm clocks resetting themselves overnight. People blamed faulty wiring, a failing grid. No one thought it meant anything. Then came the surges. Entire apartment buildings reported electrical spikes powerful enough to burn out appliances. Microwaves short-circuited. Televisions hissed with static before dying. And LED bulbs glowed twice as bright before shattering. Reports trickled in from across the country. Office buildings losing power one floor at a time. Hospitals forced to switch 2 generators for reasons no technician could explain. An airport shut down after its entire control tower went dark, stranding thousands. People joked about it at first. The machines are rebelling, they said. Guess it's time to reset the Wi-Fi. But the jokes stopped when the glitches spread to cars stalling mid-drive. Subway trains grinding to a halt between stations, and automatic doors refusing to open or close. And then there was the hum. At first, only a few people noticed it, a low-frequency vibration. Barely there, felt more than heard. Some blamed tinnitus, others dismissed it as city noise. But then it grew, louder, deeper, more unnatural, and then, just as suddenly, it was gone. Only later would we understand. It wasn't a warning. It was the first sign that something was already here. The radio was the first to pick up the change. Before the blackout, before the silence, the frequencies began to shift. First it was little things. Bursts of static interrupting live broadcasts, signals dropping without reason. Then words, half-heard phrases, distorted and warped, slipping through the interference. At first, they were dismissed as misfires, overlapping signals from foreign stations or atmospheric disruptions. But those who listened closely, they heard something else. A language no one recognized. It wasn't just one voice, it was many. layered on top of one another, speaking in hushed, hurried tones. Some messages were clipped, frantic, as if trying to warn us. Others, calm, deliberate, almost expectant. A ham radio operator tried to decode one. He never finished. The night before the blackout, he vanished. His equipment was found still running, cycling through frequencies that now played only dead air. Another operator, just before disappearing, managed to record a single phrase before his transmission cut out completely. They are waiting, and then the blackout came. If you're hearing this, if you've been scanning the frequencies, trying to find someone, anyone, be careful, because the static is still there. And if you listen long enough, you might start to understand what it's saying. It happened in an instant. One moment, the world was alive. Streetlights casting their glow, televisions flickering in living rooms, the low hum of appliances filling the silence. And then, nothing. Not a gradual flicker, not a warning, just a single pulse, a final breath of electricity, and then the world exhaled into absolute darkness. Phones cut off mid-call, subway trains shuddered to a halt between stations, planes vanished from radar, their last known locations frozen in time. Those who were outside describe a strange sensation, as if the very air around them became heavier, pressing down, suffocating. Some people saw it happen. They say the sky changed, a flickering, unnatural glow that pulsed just before the blackout hit. Others reported a deep, reverberating hum rolling through the ground, vibrating in their bones. The kind of sound you don't just hear, you feel. And then came the silence. Not just the absence of noise, but something deeper, a stillness that didn't belong. No car horns, no buzzing street lamps, no distant music spilling from windows. Just the sound of breathing, of heartbeats pounding in panicked chests, of thousands, millions, standing in the dark, realizing all at once that something was very wrong. At first, people waited. Surely the power would return. Generators would kick in, emergency services would respond. But then the minutes turned to hours, and the hours stretched longer. And slowly, one by one, people began to understand. The lights weren't coming back. The official statements came quickly. Government agencies took to the airwaves, one of the few communication methods still working. A temporary disruption, they called it. A cascading grid failure, an issue with the power stations. Their voices were steady, rehearsed, reassuring, but no one believed them, because the people who were really there, the ones who saw the glow in the sky, the ones who heard the unearthly hum, had a different story to tell. A man in the Midwest reported seeing the horizon flash white moments before everything shut down. A woman in the city swore she felt the ground shift beneath her feet, as if something massive had stirred just below the surface. And then there was the air, charged, electric, wrong. People described their hair standing on end, their skin prickling moments before the blackout struck. Scientists offered half answers. A possible solar flare, maybe? But there were no reports of unusual sun activity, an electromagnetic pulse. But no nation had claimed responsibility. And even if it had been an attack, why was there no damage? No fires, no explosions, just darkness? And then came the whispers. People on the few remaining radio stations started talking, sharing what they'd heard. A secret project in the mountains. A facility that went silent hours before the blackout. A warning buried in static, too garbled to understand, but desperate, urgent. The officials insist it's all under control. But if that's true, why do the emergency broadcasts sound just as afraid as the rest of us? If you're listening to this, then you already know. It's not just the power, it's everything. Hospitals, those that should have had backup generators, failed within hours. Doctors struggled to keep machines running, ventilators shut down mid-breath, and ICU monitors flickered out one by one. Some hospitals managed to switch over to emergency power for a while, but then something worse happened. The generators died, not all at once, one by one across cities, states, each failing without warning, not overloaded, not drained, just dead, as if something had reached into their circuits and turned them off. And then there were the subways. When the blackout hit, thousands were trapped underground, left in total darkness. No phones, no emergency lights, just the sound of breathing, the occasional panicked shout, the distant rattle of something moving where it shouldn't be. Some stations reestablished power, briefly. The emergency lights flickered on, but not for long. Survivors said they saw things in those flashes, shadows where no one should be, figures standing between the train cars waiting. People are missing, not just stranded, gone. Passengers unaccounted for, entire subway cars found completely empty, save for shoes, bags, belongings left behind. No signs of struggle, no blood, just absence. And still, the emergency broadcasts insist everything is fine, that the power will return, that there's nothing to be afraid of, but I don't believe them, and neither should you. It didn't take long. At first, people waited, hopeful, patient. They told themselves the power would return. That help was on the way. But when the hours turned to days, and the days stretched into an unbearable silence, something shifted. I heard it happen. The first reports came through shortwave transmissions. Panicked voices describing streets filled with broken glass, store shelves stripped bare, entire neighborhoods turning against each other. The last streetlights had barely flickered out before the first gunshots rang out in the dark. Without alarms, without cameras, who was going to stop them? The police tried, the military too, but something's wrong with them. They're not trying to contain the riots. They're trying to contain something else. Curfews were issued almost immediately, enforced by troops that weren't stationed here before the blackout. Entire blocks were cordoned off overnight, no one allowed in or out. If you ask the government, they'll tell you it's for our safety. But if you listen closely, you'll hear the screams. And then there's the other thing. People are whispering about the ones who walk the streets after curfew, figures moving in the dark, faces just out of sight. Some claim they're looters, others think they're something else. Something not human. I don't know what's real anymore, but I do know this. If you're still out there, stay inside. Lock your doors. And whatever you do, don't go near the patrols. They're not looking for criminals anymore. I don't know how much longer I can keep broadcasting. The stations are going silent. Not all at once, not suddenly, but one by one, like candles snuffed out in the dark. At first, I thought it was just interference. But then I listened closer. There's something beneath the static. The internet is gone. Cell towers are down. All that's left is the radio. But even that is barely holding on. The only frequencies still transmitting belong to the government. Flat, lifeless voices repeating the same reassurances. Stay calm. Help is coming. Everything is under control. But it's a lie. Because I've spoken to people outside the cities. They've seen what's coming. And the closer it gets, the worse the transmissions become. There's a sound, a hum, buried under the government's messages. At first, I thought it was just interference, but it's growing. It's low, resonant, unnatural. Not quite a voice, but not just noise either. Some say it's a warning. Others say it's a signal. I don't know what it means, but if you're listening, if you still have a working radio, tune in and tell me if you hear it too. If you're still out there, if you can still hear me, then you're one of the lucky ones. Or maybe you're one of the last ones left. Entire neighborhoods are empty now, not just abandoned, erased. Homes still stand, doors still locked, meals still sitting on kitchen tables. But the people? Gone. No signs of struggle. No footprints leading away. No messages left behind. Just emptiness. It's not just here. Reports are coming in from all over. Small towns, apartment buildings, whole city blocks, just silent. No calls for help. No bodies. Just the unsettling absence of sound. And then there are the military convoys, moving in the dead of night, headlights dimmed, taking roads no one else is allowed to travel. I've spoken to survivors who have seen them firsthand. Long lines of unmarked vehicles heading for places they won't talk about. They're not evacuating people. They're collecting something. Someone tried to follow them. A ham radio operator I'd been in touch with. He had a working car, a plan, too many questions. He told me he was going to tail one of the convoys, see where they were going. He didn't make it far. His last transmission came at 2:37 a.m. A single word, breathless, terrified. Run. Then, static. I don't know where they went. I don't know what they were after. But I do know this. If the military's moving towards something instead of away, then whatever's waiting at the end of the road isn't human. The longer this blackout lasts, the worse it gets. People aren't just disappearing. They're changing. Sleep is impossible now. The nights stretch too long. The silence pressing against the walls like something alive. Those of us still holding on, still listening, we've started noticing things. Shadows that don't move like they should. Figures standing at the edges of firelight, their faces just beyond recognition. At first, we thought it was the mind playing tricks. Exhaustion, paranoia, isolation. We blamed it all. But the more we talk, the more we realize. We're all seeing the same thing. I spoke to a man last night, a survivor, holed up in an old motel on the outskirts of town. He whispered through the radio, voice shaking, telling me about something standing outside his window. Not moving, not speaking, just watching. I asked him how long it had been there. He said he didn't know. He said he was afraid to blink. And then his transmission cut off. We're hearing whispers now, too. Not from radios, from the dark. Soft, distant voices murmuring from behind locked doors, inside empty houses. They sound familiar, like someone you lost, like someone you know shouldn't be there. If you hear them, don't answer, because whatever they are, they're not looking for conversation. The stories are spreading. People are searching for answers, desperate for meaning in a world that's been swallowed by silence. Some believe this is divine punishment, that the world is being cleansed, purged of something impure. Others whisper of a reckoning, a force beyond comprehension, reclaiming what was never meant to be ours. And then there are the ones who speak of them, not looters, not soldiers, not human. Figures without faces, standing motionless in the streets. They don't move, they don't speak, they only wait. A man called into a frequency I was monitoring last night. His voice barely a whisper, shaking with something I couldn't place. He said he had seen one, standing in his driveway. He thought it was just a man, maybe someone lost, maybe a looter, checking for an easy target. But then he noticed it wasn't breathing. It wasn't shifting its weight, wasn't reacting to the wind, wasn't even blinking, just standing. He locked his doors, closed the blinds, waited until morning, and when he finally dared to look outside again, it was gone. But its shadow remained, burned into the concrete, an outline of something that shouldn't exist. He's not the only one. More and more survivors are reporting the same thing. Figures appearing in the night, lingering at the edges of candlelight, watching from abandoned streets. When the sun rises, they vanish, leaving only that same impossible shadow behind. I don't know what they are. I don't know what they want. But if you see one, don't let it see you first. I'm not the only one still broadcasting, Across the airwaves, voices break through the static, frantic, shaking, desperate to be heard, survivors clinging to whatever sliver of connection remains, spilling their fears, their encounters, their warnings. A woman called in last night. She had barricaded herself in a basement with a crank radio and a single candle. She wasn't alone. Not at first. She had been with her brother. But then, she heard a knock at the door, 3 slow taps, precise, deliberate. Her brother went to check. She begged him not to. He opened it anyway. And the next thing she knew, he was gone. No scream, no struggle, just gone. She swore she saw something in the hallway before slamming the door shut. A shape just out of sight, standing too still, too tall. She hasn't opened it since. Another man, his voice raw with exhaustion, said he'd been following the shadows burned into the pavement. They weren't normal, he insisted. They weren't cast by anything real. They led somewhere. When I asked where, he hesitated. Then the transmission cut out. They never call back. I don't know where they go, but I know one thing. If you hear a knock in the dark, do not open the door. Time doesn't feel real anymore. I don't know how long it's been, days, weeks. The clocks are dead. The sky never seems to change. The nights stretch too long and the days feel just as empty. People are breaking. Sleep is rare, and when it comes, it brings shapeless nightmares. Some survivors say they wake up to the feeling of breath on their skin, as if something had been standing over them. Others don't wake up at all. Food is running out. Water isn't safe. The ones who still have supplies refuse to share. Not out of greed, but out of fear. They say the darkness is making people different. There's a man in the city who hasn't slept since the blackout began. He's seen what waits in the silence. He won't say what it is, only that it's watching. And the longer we stay in the dark, the closer it gets. If you're still listening, stay awake, stay aware, and whatever you do, don't be the last one left. They've been seen. Not just by one person, not just in passing. Everywhere. More and more survivors are calling in, whispering the same thing. They are watching us. It starts as a feeling, a prickling at the back of the neck, the sensation of eyes in the dark where no eyes should be. People wake up gasping, convinced they weren't alone in their rooms. Some refuse to sleep at all. And then some of them disappear. Not dragged away, not taken, just gone. Doors still locked. Shoes left by the bedside. Radios still tuned to dead frequencies, waiting for voices that won't come back. The ones who remain are left with only the stories and the warnings. A woman in the city said she saw one from her apartment window, standing still. Not a man, not a shadow, but something that did not belong. She looked away for only a second. When she turned back, it was inside. She ran. She doesn't know how she got out, doesn't remember making it down the stairs. She only remembers the feeling like it had been waiting for her to blink. She says they don't move when you're watching. So whatever you do, don't look away. The emergency broadcasts haven't stopped. The government is still insisting this is just a crisis, a disruption, an inconvenience. They tell us the power will return, that everything is under control. But I've spoken to too many survivors now. I know better. There are places where the streets are empty, not because people ran, but because they were erased. Entire buildings sealed off, entire towns lost, and still the official response remains the same. Everything is fine. But if that's true, then why are people disappearing? Why are the ones who ask too many questions the next to go silent? There's something else, a pattern. The disappearances, the figures, the growing hum beneath the government signals. It's all connected. It has to be. I think they know what's happening. I think they knew before the blackout even started, and I think, whatever this is, they knew we wouldn't survive it. There's something beneath the static. At first, it was nothing more than a distant hum, low, barely audible, easy to dismiss as interference. But the longer you listen, the clearer it becomes. People have been calling in, their voices shaking, saying the same thing. The sound is getting closer. A man from the north said it started as a dull vibration, something he could feel more than hear. Then it became a pulse, rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat. A woman from the city said she heard metal groaning, deep underground, like something massive shifting beneath her feet. And then there are the whispers. I've heard them myself, soft, layered just beneath the noise. Not words, not exactly, just voices, murmuring, overlapping, speaking in tones that sound almost familiar but never quite human. A listener tried recording it, played it back, said he could hear his own voice in the whispers. But he swore he never spoke. I don't know what's causing it. No one does. But everyone agrees on one thing. The longer you listen, the closer it gets. Some survivors have stopped using their radios altogether. They say the sound isn't coming from the speakers anymore. It's coming from inside their homes. If you hear it, if you feel the hum pressing against your skull, turn the radio off and pray that whatever's on the other end isn't listening back. There's no single explanation, no official cause, no press conference offering answers, only theories. And the more we dig, the less sense it makes. Some scientists claim it was an EMP attack, an electromagnetic pulse capable of shutting down infrastructure worldwide. A weapon like that exists, theoretically. But that's the problem. If this was an attack, then where is the enemy? No country has claimed responsibility. No demands have been made. No governments have stepped forward to take credit. Wars are fought for power, for resources, for control. But whoever did this, they don't seem interested in any of that. And that's not the only inconsistency. EMP bursts caused destruction, fried circuits, burned out transformers, ruined hardware. But when the power went out, there was no damage. The grids are intact. The generators are untouched. It's as if something didn't just shut them down. It simply switched them off. A defense analyst called in, someone who used to work in intelligence. He wouldn't say his name. He wouldn't say which branch. But he did say this. If this was an attack, we should have seen it coming. We monitor everything, satellites, troop movements, missile activity, something this coordinated, this global. There would have been signs. He hesitated before his last words. But there was nothing. No warnings. No intercepted chatter. No heat signatures. Just silence. And that scares me more than anything. Then he hung up. Some survivors believe the war isn't over. They believe it never started. And if that's the case, then whatever did this isn't playing by the rules of war we understand. The scientists are scrambling for answers. Some say it was a solar flare, a geomagnetic storm powerful enough to knock out satellites, disrupt communication, and cripple the power grid. It's happened before on smaller scales. The Carrington event of 1859, a solar storm that set telegraph wires on fire. The 1989 blackout in Quebec. Millions left without power when the Earth was struck by a charged burst from the sun. But there's a problem. There were no warnings. Solar flares don't happen in silence. They leave traces, readings, energy signatures, distortions in the magnetosphere, NASA, the NOAA, the European Space Agency. None of them detected anything unusual before the blackout hit. No reports of increased solar activity. No spikes in radiation, no explanation. And then there are the anomalies. A group of astronomers reported something strange just hours before the world went dark. A faint aurora stretching across the sky, visible even in places where it never should have been. Some said the colors were wrong, shifting in ways light shouldn't behave. Others said the sky pulsed, like something had passed between the Earth and the sun, something we weren't meant to see. There was another report. A deep space observatory detected a brief, powerful energy surge from an unknown origin. It lasted less than a second. And then, silence. No official agency has acknowledged it. No country has addressed it. But the question lingers. What if this wasn't the sun at all? What if something else turned the lights off? There's something the government isn't telling us. It started as a rumor. Whispers on dead radio frequencies, fragmented transmissions picked up by ham operators. A secret experiment buried deep within classified research facilities. The kind of project that was never meant to be known. But some people knew. A caller got through 2 nights ago. His voice was strained, like he hadn't slept in days. He refused to say his name, but he had information. Details too specific to ignore. They were testing something, he said. An energy source. Not nuclear, not solar. Something else. Something new. It wasn't supposed to be weaponized. It wasn't supposed to be dangerous, but then it did something. I pressed him for more. He hesitated, then whispered. It broke something open. He wouldn't explain, just kept repeating that same phrase. I asked him where this experiment took place. Static. Then a single word. BlackRock. That name doesn't exist on any official records. No maps, no facility listings, nothing. But I checked through old frequencies deep in the archives of emergency broadcasts, and I found something. A classified military distress signal buried under layers of encryption. It came from a location that doesn't exist. The timestamp? 2 hours before the blackout began. And the message? Just 3 words. Containment has failed. Whatever they were experimenting with, it wasn't just an energy source. And if they failed to contain it, then what did they unleash? Not all eyes watching us are human. The reports started trickling in the night before the blackout. Scattered at first, dismissed as paranoia, mistaken sightings, but after the power went out, after the sky turned black, the stories became impossible to ignore. People saw something. A man outside Denver described strange lights hovering over the mountains, unmoving, pulsing faintly before vanishing in an instant. A woman in rural Texas claimed she watched a craft with no markings, no sound, glide over her farm, its underbelly glowing faintly against the night sky. Then there's the transmission. A ham radio operator scanning frequencies hours before the collapse picked up something strange, a signal buried beneath the usual chatter, beneath government dispatches and civilian channels. It wasn't coded, not encrypted, but it wasn't in any language he could recognize. He recorded it, played it back. It wasn't a voice. Not exactly. More like a layered sequence of tones, something that felt intentional. A transmission meant to be received. And then, as he listened, the power in his house flickered. His radio shorted out. And the blackout began. There was another transmission too, intercepted minutes before the collapse. An automated military distress signal broadcasted on an unregistered frequency. The message was brief, but chilling. Unidentified aerial presence detected. Initiating containment. Do not engage. And then silence. There was no engagement, no response. Because what do you do when the thing you're trying to fight was never meant to be stopped? Some believe the blackout was a consequence of human failure, a war, an experiment gone wrong. But what if it wasn't? What if the lights didn't go out because of something we did? What if they were turned off so something else could arrive? The blackout changed everything, not just the way we live, not just the way we survive, the way we see. Because the longer we sit in the dark, the more we begin to understand. Maybe the light wasn't keeping us safe. Maybe it was keeping something else hidden. There's a theory, whispered across failing radio signals, passed between survivors who are too afraid to sleep. What if the dark was always there? Not empty, not lifeless, but full. A researcher, before he disappeared, claimed he had been studying something. He called it the frequency threshold. The idea that there are things we can't perceive, simply because our world is too loud, too bright, too full of distractions. But take away the light. Take away the constant hum of electricity, the layers of static, the signals and noise that fill the air. And what's left? He said there were spikes in radiation just before the blackout. Not the kind you find after an explosion, the kind that comes from something pressing through. He said the silence isn't empty, it's crowded. I don't know what that means. But I know this. People aren't just vanishing. Some are seeing things, not hallucinations, not tricks of the mind, but shapes, moving at the edges of candlelight, figures that don't make sense, not watching, not approaching, just waiting. One survivor called in, voice raw with fear. He had been staring into the night outside his window when he realized the shadows weren't random, they were the same. A pattern, a design, like something was using the darkness to shape itself. Then the call cut off. I don't know what he saw. I don't know if I ever will. But the thought lingers, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Maybe the blackout didn't take anything away. Maybe it just let something in. If you're listening to this, if you can still hear my voice, then you need to understand something. This is the last broadcast. I don't know how much longer I can keep the signal going. I don't know if anyone is even listening anymore. But if you are, if there's still someone out there, you have to hear this. Something is coming. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it wants. But I know it's close. I can feel it pressing against the silence. I've been hearing things in the static. Voices, some familiar, some wrong. They call out names. Whisper memories that don't belong to them. They sound human, but they aren't. Do not answer them, no matter what they say, no matter who they sound like. They're not real. And then there's the light. It started as a glow on the horizon, faint at first, flickering like a dying star. But now, it's spreading. I don't know where it's coming from. It isn't the sun. It isn't electricity. It's something else. People who see it don't come back. I got one last message before the signal started breaking up. A survivor in the next town over, his voice barely more than a whisper. They turned the lights back on. I asked him what he meant. Silence. Then, it's not the same light. And then the transmission cut out. I don't know what he saw. I don't know if I want to know. But I do know this. If the lights return, if you see them flicker back to life, don't go outside. Don't look. Because whatever comes back isn't ours anymore. If you're listening, stay inside. Don't trust the voices. And if you see the lights return, it might already be too late. Something is wrong with the transmission. I don't know if you can hear it on your end, but the signal is changing. There's interference, but it's not static. It's not the usual distortion, and it's something else. It started as a faint pulse beneath my voice, a low, rhythmic vibration, like a heartbeat buried in the noise. But now it's growing. There was an emergency tone a few minutes ago, the kind they use for official broadcasts, but it wasn't normal. It didn't have the usual automated voice. It didn't give instructions. It just played, loud, unbroken. And underneath it, I swear I heard something else. Not a message, not words. A hum, deep, layered, almost alive. I don't know how to describe it. It's not a machine. It's not feedback. It feels intentional, like something is trying to get through, like something is pushing against the edges of the frequency, pressing against the airwaves, waiting for the right moment to... Wait, did you hear that? For a second, the tone just stretched. Like it wasn't just a sound, but a voice. Like it was trying to form words, but couldn't quite make them. I need you to listen. Really, really listen. Turn your volume up. Do you hear it? It's not just coming through my broadcast. It's in every frequency now. It's bleeding through the last remaining signals, seeping into channels that should be empty. And the longer it stays, the more it feels like it's not just noise. It's listening back. I don't know how much longer I can keep this going. The equipment is failing. The dials are flickering, shifting on their own. It's like the signal is being rewritten in real time, like something else is trying to take control of the transmission. If I lose my voice, if this broadcast cuts out, I need you to remember one thing. The sound isn't coming from the radio anymore, it's coming from somewhere else, and whatever is making it, it's already here. The signal is almost gone. I don't know how much longer I can hold it. The interference is overwhelming. The dials are flickering. The sound is warping. And something is pushing through. It started as a whisper beneath the static. Faint, distant, almost like an echo trapped between frequencies. At first, I thought it was just another failing broadcast, someone else trying to reach out before everything collapsed. But then I listened, and I realized it was listening back. The whisper wasn't random. It wasn't lost chatter from another survivor. It was speaking. I don't know how to explain it. The words weren't in any language I know, but somehow I understood them. A broken, distorted voice, layered, inhuman. It cut through the static, sharp and clear, carrying something deeper than sound, something that settled in my bones. They have arrived. It was only for a second, a fraction of a breath, and then the signal collapsed, warping, bending, twisting into something unnatural before vanishing completely. Silence. And then the hum returned. Not from my equipment, not from the failing radios, from outside. It's everywhere now. Vibrating through the walls, seeping into the air, pressing against my skin like a pulse that doesn't belong here. I don't know what's coming. I don't know what's waiting beyond this blackout, beyond this silence. But I know one thing. The lights are coming back on. If you're listening, run. Because whatever has arrived, it isn't leaving. Transmission lost. It's gone. The signal, the static, the hum, everything. For the first time since this started, there's nothing. Not the low crackle of failing transmissions. Not the ghostly echoes of voices trying to break through. Not even the distant warped interference that's been pressing against the edges of the frequency for days. Just silence. Deep. Heavy, absolute, and it's worse than anything that came before. I tried scanning through the channels, every station, every emergency frequency, every last shred of communication that should still be fighting to stay alive. Nothing. No automated government alerts. No garbled distress signals. No survivors reaching out, desperate to know if anyone is still listening. It's like the entire world just stopped. I don't know what's happening out there. I don't know if there's anyone left to tell me. All I know is that the quiet isn't normal. It's intentional. Because before, the static was a barrier, a shield of noise standing between us and whatever was trying to get through. The voices, the hum, the hidden signals buried in the distortion, they were all pushing against something. And now, that barrier is gone, which means so is whatever was holding them back. I can feel it. The silence isn't empty. It's pressing in, thick and suffocating, like it's waiting for something, like it's listening, like it's watching. And I don't think I should be speaking anymore. If you can hear this, if you're still out there, don't listen for a signal. Don't wait for the broadcast to return. Because this silence, it isn't the end. It's the beginning. This is it. The end of the broadcast. The last message I'll ever send. I don't know if anyone's still listening. I don't even know if there's anyone left to listen. But if you're out there, if you can hear me, you need to understand what's happened. We thought the blackout was a failure, a war, an accident, a mistake. It wasn't. It was a reset, not to wipe us out, not at first, but to clear the way for something else, something that needed the dark to take hold. And now it has. It started small, the hum beneath the static, the figures that stood just beyond sight, the whispers calling out names they shouldn't know. We thought they were intrusions, things creeping in through the cracks left by our absence. But what if they weren't intruders? What if they were always here? What if the lights weren't keeping us safe, but keeping them contained? I think the power was never meant to come back. I think the world was meant to stay dark. But something went wrong. The lights are returning, flickering back on in empty streets, buzzing to life in places where there's no one left to turn them on, and whatever was waiting in the dark, it doesn't like it. I can feel it now. The air is heavier, thicker. The silence isn't silence anymore. It's full, pressing in, watching. This world doesn't belong to us anymore. We lost it the moment the power went out. And now, the dark has a new owner. If you're listening, don't go outside. Don't follow the lights. Because whatever is turning them back on isn't trying to help us. As we close tonight's broadcast, I want to leave you with one thought. What would you do if the world suddenly went dark? Not just in the literal sense, but the way it feels. What happens when everything familiar, everything you've relied on, is wiped away in an instant? When the quiet creeps in and leaves you with only yourself to listen to? When every connection you had is lost, and the world outside your door turns into a place you don't recognize? How would you react if the rules of survival changed? If the rules of reality itself began to unravel, leaving you in the middle of a game you don't understand? Would you fight back? Or would you hide? Would you trust the voices on the other side of the static? Or would you find your own way through the silence? Take a moment to think about it, because in the end, we're all faced with that choice. The moment the lights go out and the world we know begins to fade, we'll all have to make a decision about how we face the darkness. So here's my question for you. If this was happening to you right now, what would your next move be? Would you try to survive, or would you simply let the darkness take you? I want to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below and tell me what you would do. What choices would you make if you were living through this broadcast? Would you run towards the unknown, or would you stay, holding on to the last remnants of what you once knew? And if you've enjoyed this broadcast, please consider subscribing to the channel for more. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and with your help, we can continue to explore the mysteries of the unknown together. Share this broadcast with your friends and family, because stories like this are meant to be passed on, to spark discussions, to make us think, and to prepare us for the strange and unsettling world that may one day be ours. Thank you for listening, for staying with me until the end. Until next time, stay alert, stay connected, and most importantly, stay safe.